colleague Brian Esterly here. So we're really happy. We have a great presentation on the real estate industry and a great representation of attendees from the real estate industry. And we're looking forward to engaging with everyone offline after the presentation about how you can continue to be involved in SASB and how we'll need to draw upon your expertise. So we'll be recording this webinar and we'll be sending it out, so look out for that as well. So the premise of this webinar is that we're going to catch everyone up on the state of SASB real estate standards. Right now we're in a public comment period for the draft infrastructure standards, which are available for download now until January 5th, and you can comment, and my colleague Brian will be talking further about that. So before we get into the standards themselves, I'm just going to provide a brief review or perhaps somewhat of a small introduction for some people on the line to SASB and what we're hoping to accomplish. Then Brian will get into the details of how the standards have evolved after receiving some expert feedback, and we'll leave a few minutes for question and answers at the end. So during the webinar, if you have questions about anything we say, feel free to submit, to type in your questions, and we will attempt to address as many as we can. So SASB is a 501c3 based in San Francisco that is developing sustainability accounting standards geared towards public corporations in the U.S. to help them disclose material and decision-useful information to investors. So some things that make us different is our focus on identifying industry-specific metrics that are comparable for investors and therefore we believe more useful than the plethora of sustainability data that's already out there. So we use a research process that incorporates balanced stakeholder participation from corporates, investors, analysts, and public bodies to identify those metrics that are most likely to be material for companies. So it's important to note that SASB is not seeking new regulation. SASB standards are designed to fit seamlessly within existing regulatory frameworks. So we're using the definition of materiality defined by the Supreme Court, and we aim to help companies identify and disclose decision-useful information in their 10K filings. So we're, of course, happy to talk more about the intricacies of these legal definitions and regulations if you have any questions offline. But the point is SASB standards are voluntary and we are not seeking new regulation, nor taking away the right of companies to determine materiality. So continuing on the note of how SASB fits within existing disclosure regulation, so the standards have significant overlap with what is already being disclosed in 10K filings. Our research team actually found that 74% of information on SASB topics are already present in 10K filings, but it's not standardized and the information is not presented in the most useful format for investors. And a second important point is that SASB works hard to identify the minimum number of topics and metrics for companies to report. So we understand reporting fatigue and the cost of reporting for companies, and our research team has worked really hard with the input of experts to identify an average of just 5 disclosure topics and 14 metrics per industry. So what have we done so far? Actually, a lot. Our research process to date has been ambitious and quite fast-paced. So since the end of 2012, we've made our way through 8 industries and are completing the final 2, renewables and infrastructure. And we're on time to release provisional standards for infrastructure by Q1 of 2016. And we really look forward to drawing upon your expertise and input in the final stages of our standards development. Just a note on tools for adoption, SASB recently released an implementation guide for companies that are interested in adopting the standards. So I really encourage all of you to check it out if you have interest in the actual application of what we're talking about. You can visit our adoption site and download the standards at usingsasb.org. And then finally, I just want to encourage you all to check out our website at SASB.org. It's a fantastic repository of information on how we develop the standards, the materiality map and the industry briefs, the research briefs you can check out for that. It also has resources for implementation and a great tool as the standards navigator if you're interested in looking at completed provisional standards for any other industry. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Brian, who's going to talk more specifically about where we are with the real estate standards.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Bryn. Once again, this is Brian Esterly, and thank you all very much for your participation today. Just a brief reminder that the webinar is being recorded. You are able to submit questions at any time using the chat function. If any questions come in that are highly relevant to topics that we will be talking about, we will try to address them as we go. But with that said, we will have a Q&A session at the end. So on to the real estate specific portion of the presentation. The presentation, the prepared slides here are pretty brief. We really only have about 6 slides or so, and here are the aspects that we're going to aim to cover. First, the SASB research process, the process that we've used for standards development for all sectors thus far, and where we are right now in the process relative to the real estate industry. Secondly, we'll look at the current draft of standards in terms of how they've progressed throughout the year and the next steps for the standards. Thirdly, we'll move into 2 key areas of focus right now, and what I mean by that are some of the key areas that our research team has flagged that we're trying to dive deeper in, get a better understanding of, make sure we really are capturing the industry dynamics and we understand both the corporate and investor viewpoint on these issues. Next, we'll highlight a few much more high-level other areas of focus. And the point of a lot of this, and really one of the themes of the webinar overall, is about how SASB's process is very much focused on stakeholder feedback. And so one of the overall themes here is that your feedback is always welcome, always encouraged. I hope that you found to date that the SASB team will always listen to a comment from industry experts like yourselves. So let's dive into the process, and this might be a quick refresher for a few of you. This is the same process that SASB has used for every sector to date. So infrastructure is the 10th sector. This is the 10th time we've used the process. As you likely know, real estate is one of 8 industries within the infrastructure sector. And so it's almost the 80th time that this process has been used to develop industry-specific standards. You may recall that we started this process towards the beginning of this year with a couple months of research, some initial engagement. We put forward the first draft of our standards to our industry working group. I've talked with many of you about that. I think that the first draft of standards fell short in many, many areas, and so the preceding period, the next few months, were really spent trying to further develop our understanding of the industry, the particular and the unique dynamics of the industry, and then develop, revise, and tailor our standards accordingly. Another big effort that we'll talk about a bit more was our under-recognition of the pre-existing sustainability frameworks and disclosure frameworks that already exist in the real estate industry. And so that's another area that we dove into, what I think pretty deeply after this first draft of the industry working group standards. And so that first round of revisions led to the release of what I'll refer to as our public exposure draft standards, essentially our second draft. We released these standards in October, and we released them publicly for a 90-day public comment period. So this public comment period is coming to a close on January 5th, which is, of course, approaching very rapidly here. And you'll hear me say this a few more times about how this public comment period is a critical part of our process. It's another opportunity for engagement, for us to receive what we hope is comprehensive input on the effectiveness and the appropriateness of our standards and areas for improvement. After the public comment period closes on January 5th, our research team will spend another couple of months performing another round of revisions, more engagement, and that will culminate with the release of the provisional standards in March of this next year of 2016. I'm not going to go into SASB's objectives and plans beyond the provisional standards release. We are happy to talk about that with any of you offline or individually, or if we have time at the end on a group, but I think that we will move forward into diving into where our standards are right now. But first, just a bit more about the public comment period. We're not going to walk through all these questions that you see on the screen. They can be found on the website that's on this slide, comment.sasb.org. That's the website where you can download the standards if you don't already have them, where you can learn more about the public comment period, and most importantly, where you can actually submit the public comment letter. Just from a very high level, a few of the key things that we're focused on in terms of receiving input from the industry and from investors are the materiality of the issues overall, what viewpoints are, what perspectives are on if you think we've identified the right materials, the right issues, if you think we're missing any. Secondly, for each issue, we have a set of accounting metrics that are designed to capture how companies are performing on that specific issue. So in terms of our metrics, how accurate are they? How appropriate are they? Are we missing any key ones? Do we have redundant ones? And then thirdly, and this is a very important aspect, especially from the corporate or the industry perspective, how cost effective are the metrics? Are they currently being tracked and at least internally right now? Are they currently being disclosed? If not, what types of additional costs companies may face in order to track and disclose this information? So let's do a very brief refresher of what the first draft of SASB standards looked like. We focused on 3 issues on energy. We had an issue, I think many of you will recall, which we titled Environmental and Socioeconomic Impacts. It largely revolved around transportation types of issues and urban planning and density. And then a 3rd issue on climate change risk exposure. And so, yeah, as I've already said, this was the first draft going back about 6 months. We received an enormous amount of industry feedback based on this first draft. We tried hard to listen very closely, take everything that we've heard into account, and so we've done substantial revisions. And so now we'll look at the revisions that we have made for this current public exposure draft that we released in October. So first off, on energy, we retained the issue, but we drastically revised the metrics. We'll get into that a bit more in a minute here. As far as the environmental and socioeconomic impacts issue, we eliminated that completely. I'm happy to go into that in more detail if that would be helpful to anyone, but largely driven by industry feedback. Thirdly, on the climate change risk exposure issue, we've retained the issue. One of the areas of focus we have right now is to try to improve the quantification, the metrics that we have for this issue. That's an area I'll highlight later where we are especially receptive to feedback. Number 4, we added an issue on water management. I think that's a big issue that we failed to include for the first round, and again, driven by investor and corporate feedback, we have now included water as an issue. And then 4th, we have an issue that is titled Management of Tenant Sustainability Impacts. This is a new issue. We will talk about that in a bit more detail in just a moment here. And so just from a high level, our current public exposure draft standards focus on 4 issues, and in all that equates to 14 metrics. I believe 10 quantitative metrics and 10 qualitative or discussion analysis. So let's dive into 2 of the key themes where SASB is really focused in trying to maximize the input that we're receiving from the industry. So first, we're going to look at both the energy management issue and the water management issue. And so here's a few of the key questions that come to mind when we're looking at the issue, but most importantly, the metrics that we have for each of these issues. With our metrics, are we measuring the right aspects of this issue? Have we selected the best metrics, the most appropriate metrics? Are we missing anything significant? And then number 3, have we aligned metrics to the maximum extent possible with pre-existing frameworks? Like I said earlier, that was an area where I think we've put in an especially large amount of attention, and I think we've made great progress. I have no doubt that there is always room for more progress. So these are the aspects of energy and water that we're focused on. We're focused on data coverage, we're focused on absolute consumption, like for like, and ratings. Ratings is applicable to energy, but not water. And so next we'll look at the actual metrics that we have to capture performance on each of these aspects, as well as just from a high level, who these metrics are aligned with. So we won't walk through each of these metrics, but as you can see, the row at the top includes the energy issue and the water issue, and then below it you will find the metrics that are used in each of those issues to capture data coverage, and essentially how a company is performing in terms of data coverage. And the next, the metric for absolute consumption, and so on down to like for like and ratings. The column on the far right is who, at least from a high level, these metrics are aligned with. This is something that was not, essentially part of or deeply embedded in the first draft of standards. This is an area where I think we've made significant improvements, and where we've especially tried to listen hard to the industry. And so one of the key organizations or sustainability frameworks that we focused on is GRESB, given the substantial strides that GRESB has made throughout the industry. And so we've worked hard to align our metrics on both of these issues with GRESB. And so you'll see that essentially every one of these aspects only are at least to a certain extent aligned with GRESB. There are a few aspects that are not. For example, if we look at absolute consumption in the water issue, we include an additional component in terms of water consumption in water-stressed regions. Happy to talk about more if that's helpful. And then if you look at the metric for ratings and the energy issue, that one is only partially aligned for GRESB. Of course, it goes without saying that because some other organizations are aligned with GRESB, such as EPRA, then completely or at least partially aligned with them as well. ULI Greenprint to at least a certain extent on a few of these metrics. GRI, of course. CDP, WFE is the World Federation of Exchanges, again, this column here indicates either complete or partial alignment. I think we've really wanted to focus on leveraging these pre-existing sustainability frameworks. With that being said, if a company is not currently participating in them, our standards are not designed to operate at the exclusion of that company adopting SASB standards. Another issue that I'm happy to go into if that's helpful, but just bringing it back to our high-level focus, we're interested in, are these aspects around data coverage, absolute consumption, like for like, and ratings, are they the right aspects for us to focus on? Have we selected the best metrics, and have we aligned our metrics to the maximum extent possible with pre-existing frameworks? So let's move on to another area that we're focused on right now, which is diving in a bit deeper to the issue that I alluded to earlier, the fourth issue that we have in our public exposure draft standards. And so right now we've titled the issue Management of Tenant Sustainability Impacts. So that might give some vague idea of what it means, but let's dive into it in a bit more detail. So the issue overall, we've placed it in our business model and innovation category. That lies in contrast to energy and water, for example, that are in our environment category, or for example, in other industries when there might be a labor relations or an employee health and safety type of issue, that would be in the social category. SASB's definition of sustainability and the framework that we use to approach sustainability includes this third category that we've titled Business Model and Innovation. And so this category is really focused on the indirect impacts of a company's products and services. I think a great example of this is product life cycle. So in terms of a product, it would be focusing on the sustainability impacts that are generated from a third party or a customer, for example, owning or at least operating that product. And so while the company does inherently likely have some level of influence, they lack complete control over the sustainability impacts, and it needs to be looked at from more of a business model or more of a holistic type of level. So applying this issue more specifically to the real estate industry, we're really focused on how companies are performing in terms of strategies to improve tenant sustainability impacts. So a couple ideas might come to mind. The whole concept and all the work that's been done in the green lease space. Of course, the tenant star legislation. We could think about other things like tenant fit out guides and so forth that have sustainability requirements or mandates. So far for this public exposure draft standards, we're currently focused on two key aspects, or at least aspects that we feel thus far are critical to how companies are performing in terms of managing tenant sustainability impacts. And so those two aspects are, number one, the utilization of cost recovery clauses for resource efficiency related capital improvements, of course referring to leases. So this gets at, again, the idea or the concept of green leases. We do understand that a green lease is more of a concept. It can't necessarily be readily quantified. I think that'd be fantastic if we could, but I think we recognize that we're still a ways away from that. And so we focused on what I think is commonly regarded as one of the most important aspects of a green lease, which is the presence of, again, a cost recovery clause for resource efficiency related capital improvements. Secondly, we focused on tenant submetering, and beyond tenant submetering, whether or not tenants pay for the actual consumption of energy and or water. So I included a question mark there for most important aspects because that's our hypothesis right now. But this is a key area where we are extremely interested in the industry's feedback and investors' feedback. And so a few of the key questions that we're focused on to help, what I hope is guide feedback that those of you in the industry provide to SASB. Is this issue important and framed appropriately? One way to help provide feedback on that might be to review how we've actually described and written up the issue. If you have the public exposure draft standards in front of you, or if you can pull them up later, they include a rather comprehensive qualitative description of the actual issue. It's a bit lengthy, but I think that if you can make your way through it, you would understand how at least SASB is approaching this issue right now, and we would really appreciate feedback on that. Secondly, what are the most important aspects? Are these two, do you feel that they are two of the most important aspects? Are we missing anything else? And then thirdly, can these aspects actually be quantified in an objective and cost-effective manner? So I'm going to quickly mention a couple other areas of focus. We're already at 25 minutes after the hour, so again, feel free to submit any questions. We'll try to save a bit of time for Q&A at the end, and we're happy to have this run at least a little bit long if any of you do have questions that that you would like us to address. But before we get to that, a couple of other areas of focus. We have not currently included any intensity metrics for either energy or water. Interested to see if you think we're missing an opportunity there. SASB generally focuses on absolute performance. We don't normally include normalized metrics. But with that being said, interested if there are any, like I said, if we're missing any key opportunities here or the real estate industry specific dynamics that we might be failing to capture. Secondly, onto the climate change adaptation issue, I think we need some work on the single quantitative metric that we have that's focused on FEMA special flood hazard areas. We've already received some feedback on that. We would appreciate more feedback on how we can improve that. Thirdly, in terms of waste management, we still have not included this as an issue. We've had some mixed opinions on that. If anybody feels strongly about this issue, that it is in fact a material issue for the industry, and they can support that with a significant body of evidence, then we would be extremely receptive to having that conversation and reviewing any existing evidence. Number 4, design for tenant health. We currently have this categorized as a emerging issue, which essentially indicates that the current body of evidence does not warrant its inclusion in our standards right now, but we recognize that it's an important theme and trend in the industry, and so it's essentially on our watch list for over the next couple of years. If the body of evidence starts to grow or increase, consider it for inclusion at a future date. And then thirdly, this dives into, it gets a bit granular, so we're not going to cover it on the webinar, but the approach that we've taken in terms of our metric structure to these real estate industry specific issues around organizational control, organizational structure, and boundary issues. And to really provide feedback on that, I would highly recommend reviewing the technical protocol that is in the standards. The technical protocol helps explain, helps essentially standardize the metric. And I think that these issues will make a bit more sense once one has had the chance to review the technical protocol and our standards. And so one more time, I'm going to reiterate that the public comment period is open right now. It has been open since early October. It ends on January 5th. This is, again, a critical point for our process. We are interested in feedback from companies, from consultants, from service providers, from investors. I think what we often find in the public comment period is it's when we really receive the most robust and comprehensive public comments from companies and from industry associations, and we really take those seriously. The ideal form of communication from our perspective is, like I've said, this public comment letter. It's a transparent process. The public comments are posted publicly on our website. Our research team provides a formal response that's also posted publicly. But with that being said, we are more than open to engagement in any way that you or your organization sees fit. That could include informal calls and meetings and emails, more formal organizational level meetings and communication. And then with all of this said, and with emphasis on this current window right now of how it's a critical time for input, like I've said, we will be releasing our provisional standards in March, but by no means whatsoever does that end our engagement with the industry. In some ways, it's really just what we hope is the beginning. Again, happy to go into that with any of you on a more one-off basis, but I think in respect to time, we are happy to address any questions that come in. Feel free to use the chat function. I wanted to see if Sheldon at NAREIT wanted to share a few quick words. If you're on, Sheldon, you are more than happy to do so. I think you should be unmuted now. If not, or if we lost you because we're already at the half hour, then not a problem at all. Okay, not to worry, assuming your phone wasn't muted, could have technical difficulties, but I think we have one question we might want to at least briefly go into. Go ahead. Yeah,
so the question is, have you had demand for the inclusion of waste management? So I think like in the UK, in Europe, this is increasingly becoming an issue, and someone is curious whether this is the same case in the US, and also if we've considered management of biodiversity at all.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the question. First, on waste management, yes, we have had some demand. I would say that it has been rather limited when we emphasize that SASB's approach is really on the investor perspective. And I think that, as Bryn had mentioned earlier, that differs from other types of sustainability disclosure organizations. And so the approach we've taken on waste management thus far is that our research team has been unable to build a sufficient enough body of evidence for the inclusion of the issue. We try to have a high level of discipline in making sure that the evidence really exists, that this issue does, and at least has in the past impacted a company's financial performance or risk profile. We have not been able to build that body of evidence up to a sufficient level. So if anybody has additional resources on evidence, we would be all ears and open to the consideration of that. We have not dived very deeply into the biodiversity issue. I would be more than happy to talk about your perspective on that, or how you see that issue playing out in terms of the risk and opportunity for real estate companies and REITs, as well as how that might impact their financial condition. So if there are any other questions, we are more than open to them. It looks like we have a few questions. Talk more about GRESB alignment. So over the last maybe 6 months or so, really what became abundantly clear from the first draft of our standards is we failed on an opportunity to align with GRESB. Since then, I think we've developed a very strong working relationship with GRESB, and we want to respect the accomplishments that they've made in the industry while leveraging them, and at the same time staying completely consistent with the SASB disclosure framework. So to the maximum extent possible, and I think you saw that it was pretty significant, especially in the energy and water issues, we have been able to stay true to the SASB disclosure framework and essentially align with GRESB. The metrics might not read exactly like the survey questions in the GRESB survey, but often if you dive into the technical protocol, you will find that if a company is already reporting on the GRESB platform, they should already have the data to potentially make a few adjustments, maybe not, but they essentially already have the data for the SASB metric.
Sure, so it looks like we have a few more questions coming in, so I think we'll continue to take a few more. I know we're running a little bit over, but in the interest of continuing this dialogue, we'll proceed with a few more. So this question is about climate change. So have you considered broadening the climate change question beyond the identification of FEMA flood hazard areas? So FEMA has not yet included sea level rise exposures, and this question would not include severe storm events and wildfires, for example.
It's a fantastic question, and I can already tell that I would love to have a conversation, more comprehensive conversation offline about this. This is an issue that appears unsurprisingly in many industries. I think we've had a heightened level of focus when it's a type of industry that may have a supply chain, and if they're extremely reliant on a certain component of that supply chain, and that component has a high level of risk exposure in maybe like a special flood hazard area, something like that. So it applies a bit differently in the real estate industry, and I want to be, make everyone aware that we are also aware of that. But to more directly answer your question, we would really like to expand beyond FEMA and the special flood hazard area zones. We've had a lot of challenges. We've made a number of attempts in prior industries to quantify performance in different ways outside of just FEMA, which I know can be a controversial subject in and of itself. I think the point that you made in that it's not always the special flood hazard areas, but we have some research that shows that the areas that are located right next to special flood hazard areas that are at risk of reclassification potentially have carry more risk or more of a direct financial impact than properties that are actually in a special flood hazard area. So long-winded way of saying that we need to do more work here. We would love to make more improvements, or in more of an accurate and objective and appropriate way quantify performance on the issue. And I would really appreciate having a conversation with the person that submitted that question.
Okay, so this is a good question about sort of the international context, which SASB has thought about, even though it's geared towards the U.S. public corporations. So how would the standard apply to energy or carbon reporting outside the U.S. in terms of the values that are used? So, for example, would countries out of the U.S. be required to use the DOE values for carbon conversion or their own regional conversion values? Just so, could you speak a little bit about our position on international context?
Sure, absolutely. So as Bryn mentioned earlier, and as it sounds like you are aware, the SASB standards are designed for U.S. publicly traded and publicly listed companies. With that being said, and really the purpose behind that statement is that we've adopted the Supreme Court's definition of materiality, which is of course also used by the SEC and then used in the U.S. Disclosure environment. With all of that being said, we are finding a significant level of interest overseas in SASB standards, and we have a number of projects going on internally right now to clarify how exactly our standards could be used by foreign companies. And yeah, I think that looking at the real estate industry, the majority of the metrics are not U.S. specific. So that does lie in contrast to some other industries where the international issue might be more challenging, where we do have more U.S. specific metrics. I think if we look at the current draft of real estate standards, a minimum number of them will encounter significant or concerning issues around overseas adoption or use. In terms of the more specific component of the question around carbon, we currently don't have a greenhouse gas metric in the industry. But with that being said, if we look at energy and if we look at water, the metrics are aligned with GRESB and they're aligned with CDP. And so, very, very much designed for international use and adoption.
Okay, great. So I think we'll take one final question, and it's, have you considered tenant-related sustainability impacts into the standards for their industries? So especially for companies with extended supply chains, their Scope 3 emissions in this person's leased space are definitely material, and it would help building owners achieve their tenant responsibilities. So have we considered this issue?
If I understand the question correctly, then the question would be applicable to the issue we discussed around management of tenant sustainability impacts. It sounds like you're getting at more of a specific risk exposure or potential opportunity for certain types of REITs, is what I imagine that you're getting at. I can tell you again right now, this is feedback that we would love to learn more about, and love to if appropriate, if broadly applicable across enough of the industry, we would love to explore opportunities for quantification around these types of risks if it's something that a company can manage. So not a highly specific answer there, but I think that if nothing else, hopefully it's at least clear that we're, that's another area of feedback that we're interested in. Absolutely open to comments or more comprehensive input on that in a public comment letter or talking offline.
Great. So just a final note, we have a comment from Sheldon of NAREIT, and he wants to let everyone on the call know that NAREIT has recently reached out to corporate members via email to solicit feedback on the draft standards, and NAREIT intends to distill the information into a comment letter to SASB. And so if you'd like to participate, they can contact Sheldon at sgroner, G-R-O-N-E-R, @nareit.com if you'd like to participate. And I just want to thank everyone for attending this webinar. If you have further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Brian or myself. We hope that you'll participate and submit a comment letter to us before January 5th, excuse me. And we will be sending this webinar, the slide deck, and the audio recording shortly, so look out for that. And if you could forward it to any of your colleagues who you think might be interested in commenting as well, we would be grateful.
Sheldon, apologies if we had technical difficulties there, but a special thanks to you and NAREIT for helping to publicize this and for working with SASB, very much appreciated. And just reiterating that NAREIT did want to make it clear that they will be providing a public comment letter and is highly interested in member feedback and input. Also, special thanks to the Real Estate Roundtable, to ULI Greenprint, and to GRESB for also helping to get the word out about this webinar and SASB standards. Very much appreciated, and thank you all for participating.
Thank you.